I realized that was super obvious, maybe too obvious for some people. If you've got a musician over here trying to flirt with somebody in the front row, or this musician over here trying to tune or talk to somebody off the side of the stage, it needs to be super obvious. I'm gonna think of the melody, right? Boom, right? Now, is everybody ready? Oh, everybody is. So you think 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. In this video, we're going to talk about counting off songs, which is a very important skill to have, especially once you start playing with people. This is an aspect of drumming and musicality that often gets overlooked, but I cannot overstate the importance of a good count off to start a good song. There are lots of different ways to count off songs, and it all depends on what kind of music you're playing and who you're playing with and the audience that you're playing to. You want to have appropriate count-offs for the musical contexts that you find yourself in. For example, you can count off tunes by verbalizing the count-off, you can snap, you can click your sticks together, you can hit the hi-hat, you can hit an open hi-hat, you can shout the count-off if it's a loud stage, but you definitely don't want to be smashing the hi-hat and yelling the count-off when you're about to play a ballad. Before we go much further, please like this video and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so I can keep bringing you behind the scenes videos and lessons like this one. All right, so let's jump into some different count-offs. Let's start off with some funk or groove type of count-offs. Now, one of the things you can do is you can hold the sticks in your hand and you can snap the time, right? So you want to think of the melody of the song that you're going to play and actually mechanize the time before you count it off. So you can start to sing the melody, and you could either sing it to yourself or you could sing it out loud depending on the type of gig you're on. But you can also start snapping that tempo so that everybody kind of starts to get a feel for where the tempo is going to be before you even count it off. One of the things I like to do is I start kind of snapping that tempo, looking around and checking to make sure everybody's ready. Because you might say, okay, everybody ready? And everybody might say, yeah, ready. And then the guitar player says, oh, wait a minute, I got a tune. And then maybe a horn player says, oh, wait a minute, I gotta check my mouthpiece. So you wanna make sure you kind of like check with everybody, make sure that they're ready to start the tune before you even count it in. So let's think of a standard tune. Let's think of the tune, The Chicken. So you could sing the bass line, or I'm gonna sing the melody right now, and I'm going to snap the tempo and check around before I even count off the tune. So thinking of that melody, we'll think, ba-ba-da-bow, okay, everybody ready? Everybody tuned? Everybody adjusted their mouthpiece, right? So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So you'll notice I even played a little pickup on the snare just to let everybody know, hey, we are starting the song. I try to be as obvious as I possibly can. Sometimes I even like to joke with the musicians that I'm playing with, say, hey, you can count on Captain Obvious over here. I'm gonna make the count off obvious. I'm gonna make the fills going into the chorus obvious. So everybody knows where we're at, including the audience. Now, if you're on a louder gig, you might wanna click the sticks together. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Some people even like to hit the hi-hat, so you could do that. You could be 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. But if you're on a wedding gig and it's cocktail hour, you don't want to count off the tune 1, 2. So you might have to count it off a little more subtly. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Now, in a louder rock context, you might want to really open up the hi-hat and let everybody know that this thing is starting. But you definitely don't want to do that during cocktail hour on a wedding gig. So here's a little bit of a funny story for you. We were in Japan with Galactic, and we had been touring for a while by this point, and we were used to playing loud audiences, loud venues. But in Japan, the audiences can be very respectful and they're a very listening audience. And for this gig, it was a seated audience in Japan. So it was a very quiet audience. You could hear a pin drop in between each song. I was using in-ear monitors at the time, and I was used to counting everything off really loudly. So after the second or third tune, I started to notice that the audience was kind of giggling at me because I was counting everything off like 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the audience could hear me shouting. They could hear us whispering if we would whisper in between tunes. So I didn't need to count off the tunes quite that loud. And the band was kind of like laughing at me too. Like, hey buddy, you don't need to count everything off that loud on this one. So know your context, know the musical situation you're in. Even if it's a situation that you've been in 1,000 times and you're used to counting off things one way, you might be with the same musicians, same project in a different context, and you might need to adjust things a little bit. Now, since we were just talking about counting things off in a rock context or a louder context, you might hear people count things off in a punk rock situation this way. But again, you don't want to use that on a wedding gig during cocktail hour. Since I've been talking about a cocktail hour, maybe sometimes during a wedding gig, because this does happen, and it might even happen with your favorite funk band that you want to play with. You might get hired to play a wedding and you might have to do a cocktail hour. So it's good to know how to count things off in different situations. So right now we're going to talk about counting something off in more of a swing situation. So what you definitely don't want to do is count off on the 1 and the 3. So you want to be thinking about the 2 and 4. And as we were talking about, having the sticks in hand, that can be cool. And then you want to snap, and you don't want to count off loud or with sticks or on the hi-hat. So you can be thinking of that melody. Let's think of Satin Doll. This is something that you might play for a cocktail hour on a wedding gig. So let's think about that melody. Do-ba-doo-doo-da. Ba-da-da. Make sure everyone's ready. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Keep in mind, I'm trying to keep this super quiet and mellow for a quiet type of gig. So that kind of count off would work too with brushes, right? So we'll think of the same tune. Dee-ba-dee-doo-da, a 1, a 2, a 1, 2, 3. Now that type of count off could work for a shuffle as well. Let's think of a very common shuffle. Let's think of Back at the Chicken Shack. So we'll sing the melody. Ba, 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 da, ba. A 1, a 2, a 1, 2. Now with a shuffle, in a louder context, you could click the sticks together. 1, a 2, a 1, 2. But however you choose to count off the tune, you want to make sure that everybody on either side of you knows exactly how you're counting the tune and when that tune is going to start. I firmly believe, and I'll say this again and again, that the groove starts with the count off. So if you've got a good strong count off, then the song is gonna get off to a good start. If you've got a rocky count off and somebody doesn't really know what they're doing and they throw out the wrong tempo or some kind of wacky count and everybody stumbles in, that's just gonna set the song up for failure, and it's gonna be hard to get into a groove once you start. So if you come to New Orleans and you go to maybe Preservation Hall or one of the other traditional New Orleans jazz establishments, you might notice some of the musicians stomping off the tune. And they'll do this, sometimes it's very loud, sometimes it's with the heel of the shoe, and it's on a nice sounding old plank floor, and I don't have that here in the studio, but you can imagine, you know, a leather sole shoe with the heel, ka, 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 ka. And that could start off any of the New Orleans standards, or a lot of them anyway. So right now, let's think of Bourbon Street Parade. Ka, 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 ka. Zaba da 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 da. Zaga da 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 boo doo da. So another way that we count off tunes in a traditional New Orleans setting is with a roll-off. This would be an 8-bar roll-off and played on the snare drum and a little bit of bass drum, depending on the player. But we could count off that same tune, Bourbon Street Parade, with a roll-off. It's worth mentioning that a lot of New Orleans drummers have their own trademark roll-offs, but this is a pretty straightforward, common roll-off that you might hear. Ba-da-da, ba-da, ba-da, ba-da-da, ba-da. All right, let's now talk about counting off ballads. I realize a lot of you may not have played ballads yet, or you might not find yourself in a situation where you're playing ballads, but the more that you play with people and the more that you find yourself gigging, the more that you might find yourself in a situation to play a ballad. And if you are, you want to make sure that you know how to count it off. So let's think of a very common ballad. So let's think of something like Body and Soul. And ballads are usually in a 60 beat per minute range. So let's think of that melody now. Boom. Do 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 do. Do, do, do. And again, you want to make this count off quiet. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. It's worth mentioning at this time that, especially for a ballad, you might have somebody set that up. You might have the piano player set it up. Or maybe the tenor sax player will play a cadenza, nice beautiful cadenza, and then he'll lead in to the melody and let everybody know where it's at. Now, if it happens that somebody else sets up a tune, whatever the tune is, if it's a funk tune or ballad or any kind of tune, I like to mechanize the time and feel the time so that when I come in, I'm not coming in cold and I'm not stumbling in. So let's go all the way back to the first tune we talked about, Chicken, and if the bass player is going to set that up, doom, a boom, boom, ba da ba doom, 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 chicka da go, boom, 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 boom. I might tap my left heel, and I might have my sticks ready to go, and I might be thinking, boom, a ba-dum, boom, ga-da-ga-dum, boom, boom, ba-dum, boom. I might get those 16th notes going on my leg, right? So that when I come in, I'm coming in solid, locked in with what's already been set up. Boom, a da dum, gong, ga da ga dum, gong, dum, a da dum, dum, da dum. That way, we don't have the bass player setting up a nice solid bass line, and then we stumble in, not in time with what he's already laying down. All right, let's talk about counting off in 3, which there are a lot of different ways to do this, and a lot of people have their own individual way of doing this. For me personally, I like to tap out the 2 and the 3 just so that everybody knows where it's at. So let's think of the melody Someday My Prince Will Come. Ba, 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 da, ba, da. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, play. Now, I realized that was super obvious, maybe too obvious for some people, but I literally like to say 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, go, or 1, 2, 3, play. So there's no guessing, no doubt. I mean, that might sound like it's super obvious, but if you've got a musician over here trying to flirt with somebody in the front row, or this musician over here trying to tune or talk to somebody off the side of the stage, it needs to be super obvious. In a lot of instances, I like to count the tunes, but sometimes I'm playing with great musicians who are really good at counting tunes. And usually the musicians that I play with who are really good at counting tunes, they do this. They snap and they catch the tempo and they sing the melody, and you can see them. Sometimes they'll look up this way. You know, I play a lot with Tony DeGrati. So let's talk about a tune that we just talked about, Chicken Shack, right? So if he's gonna count something like that off, he's gonna be, and you can see him singing that melody, right? Same thing with like Joe Ashlar, who plays organ, and I play a lot with him right now. And if we're gonna play Chicken Shack with Joe, he might be like, and then there's this thing that I like to call tempo alliance, where you can check with everybody and be like, is everybody, I feel good? Feel good to you? Feel good to you? 2, 1, 2, bump. So tempo alliance, that comes from hanging out with my buddy Eric Krasno, and sometimes when we go out to eat, we'll be like, man, what are you gonna get? What are you gonna order? And he might say, man, I was thinking about this. And I say, oh man, I was thinking about that, but I was also thinking about this thing. He's, oh, I was thinking about that too. So then we might order both of those and like try them, and we call that a food alliance. So then we started talking about, before we count off tunes, we'll look at each other and we'll be like, you wanna get a tempo alliance on this? And then make sure that it's feeling good to each other before we count off the tune. Now, I just talked about musicians who are really good at counting off tunes. If a musician is not good at counting off a tune, it can really wreck the song and maybe sometimes set a bad mood for the whole gig. I was on a gig one time and I was subbing for Johnny Vodakovich, and I was maybe only 18 or 19 years old, and it was a big band passing through, and the gig was about an hour out of town, and this big band in particular, they would pick up drummers in different towns, and they had this big extensive book. And so the leader of the band, who was a very grumpy, grouchy type of cat, this guy was obviously, you know, in a bad mood, probably for many years. And this guy tells me, he says, okay, I hate it when the drummer plays the crash cymbal and the bass drum at the same time. Don't do that on this gig. Never do that. Okay, so I'm already like trying to break myself of habits that just about every drummer does. So then he's like, all right, first tune is the overture, and I'm gonna count it like this, 1, 2, and then we're in. Okay, great. So we're getting on the stage, and everybody's on stage, and he's like, okay, everybody ready? 1, 2. And I'm thinking, because every other situation I'm in, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So he goes, 1, 2, and then I wait till 3, 4. So 1, 2. And he turns around and he's like, wrong, and starts playing. And I'm like, oh my God. And he just hated me for the rest of the gig. And it just was such a terrible experience. And I'm sure he didn't care about my feelings. But my point is that a bad count off can create a bad experience for maybe quite a long time. All right, before we get out of this lesson, I want to talk about, just for a second, how you might count off things in odd time signatures. So what I like to do, if we're setting up something in 5, I don't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll set up kind of like what I would call the rhythmic structure of the tune. So let's set up something like maybe Magnolia Triangle. So let's talk about setting up a funk tune in 7. I might tap out that rhythmic structure, and then I might play a fill leading into it. I hope this was helpful in showing you some effective ways to count off different types of tunes. If you like this video, please hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel so I can keep bringing you behind the scenes videos and lessons like this one. So I'll see you down the line. Yes, indeed. Goodbye.